The night justice stood tall. City streets carried an unusual hush that evening. It was the kind of silence that settles in only after the last bus has rolled by. The stores have pulled down their shutters, and the steady rhythm of life has slowed to a whisper. The neon signs across the avenue flickered faintly, and the hum of the streetlights filled the emptiness like a low, constant hymn. On one quiet corner, beneath the soft amber glow of a street lamp, stood Marcia Carter. She was a woman in her early 40s, her posture straight, her eyes tired but steady. Her modest food cart was more than a small business, it was her foundation, her way of holding her life together. Every burger she sold represented something larger than a meal. It was the electric bill, the rent, the shoes her daughter needed for school, and the college dream she quietly nurtured for the girl who meant everything to her. Marcia was not rich in money, but she was wealthy in resilience. That night, the smell of sizzling beef patties mingled with the crisp air. She moved with practiced rhythm, grilling, flipping, layering buns with lettuce, tomato, and sauce, each motion a reflection of years spent building her small place in the world. Her cart, humble as it was, had become a familiar spot for late-night workers, cab drivers, and students who trusted her food and her smile. It was nearly midnight when the sound of heavy boots broke the silence. A shadow stretched across the pavement, long and deliberate, before the man himself came into view. A police officer, tall, broad-shouldered, his uniform sharp, polished as if to make a statement. His eyes, however, carried none of the duty his badge represented. Instead, they held something darker: coldness, disdain, and a kind of arrogance that fed on power unchecked. He stopped at her cart without greeting. His voice was flat, almost dismissive. "I'll take a burger," he muttered. Marcia, as she had done thousands of times before, smiled politely. Habit, professionalism, dignity, she carried them all in her voice as she said, "Yes, sir." She reached for the bun, sliced it open, added the lettuce, the tomato, and the sauce with steady hands. She placed the grilled patty carefully, pressed the top bun down, and wrapped it neatly in paper. To Marcia, no customer was too small to deserve care. She slid the burger across to him. The officer dropped a few bills on the counter, his eyes fixed not on the food, but on her. For a moment, she thought he might actually eat, but instead, he leaned back, smirked, and in one slow, deliberate motion, tossed the wrapped burger into the trash can beside the cart. The sound of the paper hitting the empty bin was louder than it should have been. "You're ugly," he sneered, his words sharp, cutting through the night air. "That's why I won't eat it. Call someone from the white community to make my food. I won't take anything from you." For a moment, time froze. Marcia stood still, her hands pressed lightly against the cart, her heart pounding in her chest. She had been insulted before. Life in the city was never easy, but never with such open cruelty, never with such a public declaration of hate. Yet she did not falter. "Sir," she said quietly, her voice even, though her pulse thundered in her ears, "I am the only one here at this hour. You paid for that food. Why throw it away?" Her words carried calm, but also something deeper: dignity, the quiet strength of a woman who refused to bow her head to prejudice. The officer's expression shifted, his jaw tightened. He wasn't used to being questioned, not by someone he believed he could step on without consequence. In his eyes, her calm defiance was not strength but disrespect. His authority became his weapon. "You're out of line," he snapped. Before Marcia could respond, his hand shot out. He twisted her words into something they weren't, accusing her of speaking back, of causing disturbance. His voice rose not in truth, but in a performance meant to intimidate anyone watching. And then, in an act as cruel as it was unnecessary, he reached for his cuffs. Metal clicked around Marcia's wrists. The weight of the steel bit into her skin as neighbors nearby gasped. The late-night market, usually a place of quiet exchanges, became a stage for injustice. Shopkeepers stood frozen, torn between fear of the badge and anger at what they were witnessing. The woman they knew, the one who served them meals with kindness, who greeted them by name, was being dragged away as if she were a criminal. Marcia kept her chin high, though tears stung her eyes. She knew she had done nothing wrong, but that night, under the indifferent glow of the street lamp, Her dignity was shackled by hands that believed themselves untouchable. What neither she nor the officer knew, however, was that this single act of cruelty would awaken a storm that no badge could shield him from. Because Marcia Carter was not just a woman selling burgers on a corner. She was the daughter of a man whose name carried weight in every courthouse in America, a man who would stop at nothing to see justice restored. And justice, though delayed, was already on its way. The advocate's discovery morning light filtered through the curtains of Robert Carter's home, casting long beams across the polished oak floor. The air was still, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Robert had always loved mornings, the quiet before the work of the day began. He usually started with black coffee and the daily paper, preparing himself for the endless battles of the courtroom. But this morning would not be ordinary. A sudden knock rattled the front door, sharp and urgent. Before Robert could rise, the door swung open, and his longtime friend, Henry Lawson, burst inside. His face was flushed, his breath short from running. "Robert," Henry gasped, gripping the doorframe. "It's Marcia, your daughter. She was taken last night." Robert froze. His heart skipped a beat. He straightened his posture, his sharp eyes narrowing. "Taken," he repeated, his voice low but steady. Henry nodded, his voice breaking as he rushed the words. "By a corrupt officer. Arrested for no reason. I saw it with my own eyes. She did nothing wrong. She was dragged away in handcuffs like a criminal." For a moment, Robert's world tilted. His hand reached for the edge of the oak table, steadying himself. The paper he had been reading slid silently to the floor. His face drained of color, then slowly darkened, not with fear, but with something stronger, controlled fury. He drew in a slow, deep breath and spoke, each word deliberate. "This is not a mistake. This is not confusion. This is true crime. What kind of officer disgraces his badge by arresting an innocent woman in the dead of night? They laid hands on my daughter. But worse than that," his voice grew heavier, his eyes sharper, "they laid hands on the law itself." The room fell silent. Henry, shaken, nodded in agreement. He had known Robert for years, had seen him argue before the highest courts, dismantle corruption, and defend those who had no one else to fight for them. But in all that time, he had never seen Robert Carter look like this, without another word. Robert grabbed his coat and briefcase. The advocate was no longer at rest. The advocate was at war. The empty police station loomed ahead, its gray stone walls and glass doors meant to symbolize order and authority. Robert entered with the unshakable stride of a man who knew both his rights and his power. The officers at the front desk shifted uncomfortably as he approached. "I'm here for my daughter," Robert said, his tone firm but not raised. "Marcia Carter. She was arrested last night by one of your officers." The man behind the desk shuffled through a stack of papers, avoiding Robert's piercing stare. "There's no record of that name, sir. No arrest log here." Robert's jaw tightened. "Do not insult me with lies. Witnesses saw her taken. Produce the record and bring her here immediately." The officer swallowed, flipping pages again, but the logbook was conveniently empty. His eyes darted to his partner, who quickly looked away. Their silence said more than words ever could. Robert leaned forward, placing both hands firmly on the counter. His presence filled the room. "You think hiding the truth will protect you? You think erasing her name from your book will erase what you've done?" His voice lowered to a razor's edge. "I built my life holding men like you accountable. I have torn down walls of corruption bigger than this building, and I will not rest until my daughter is returned." But still, there was no answer, only evasions, only hollow excuses. Robert stepped back slowly. He understood now. The officer who had arrested Marcia realized too late who she was, the daughter of Robert Carter, a name known in every courthouse in the nation. Fear had spread quickly through the department. Instead of admitting the arrest, they had buried it, hidden her, hoping she would vanish into the silence of the night. But Robert Carter was not a man who allowed injustice to hide. The storm within as he stepped out of the station. The morning sun seemed too bright, too harsh against the weight pressing on his chest. His daughter, his Marcia, was out there, somewhere, held not by law, but by corruption. His fists clenched at his sides as he walked back toward the streets, where she had been taken. This was no longer just a father's fear. This was a lawyer's fury, sharpened by decades of fighting battles inside courtrooms and winning against impossible odds. He knew what this meant. Not only was Marcia in danger, but the very fabric of justice had been trampled. They think they can bury this, Robert murmured under his breath. But the law does not sleep, and neither will I. He turned his steps back to the market, where the people who had witnessed the truth waited. If the police would not give him answers, the people would. The truth would not be silenced, and Robert Carter would make certain the storm he was about to unleash would sweep through every corner of that corrupt system until justice stood tall again. The witnesses speak. The market was waking up, though it carried the heavy silence of a place that had witnessed something it could not forget. The usual chatter of vendors and buyers was replaced by murmurs that hung in the air like smoke after a fire. Robert Carter walked with measured steps down the familiar street, where his daughter had built her small business. His eyes searched for the cart that had been her pride, her symbol of independence. He found it quickly closed, the steel lid pulled tight, its bright paint dulled by the morning sun. The absence of her presence beside it struck him harder than he expected. The faint scent of grilled onions still lingered, drifting through the cool morning air. To Robert, it was both comforting and painful. It was Marcia's signature, her hard work still clinging to the place even in her absence. As he approached, the market grew quieter. Shopkeepers paused in their routines, watching him, whispering to one another. They knew who he was. More than that, they knew why he was there. Robert stopped in the center of the square and asked, his voice calm but commanding, "Who among you saw what happened to my daughter last night?" There was a pause, a collective hesitation born of fear. The police badge carried weight in this city, weight that could crush a man's livelihood with a single threat. But slowly, voices began to rise. A baker, flour still dusting his apron, stepped forward. His hands trembled, but his words did not. "Yes," he said firmly. "We were here. I saw everything. Your daughter, she was polite, respectful, calm. That officer humiliated her for no reason. He mocked her, called her names, and when she stood her ground with dignity, he arrested her, not because of law, sir, because of hate." The crowd murmured in agreement. Fear was beginning to give way to courage. Then an older man, his hair gray, his back bent slightly from years of labor, pushed through the circle. His voice was heavy with conviction. "Mr. Carter, I've known your daughter since the first day she wheeled that cart into this market. I've watched her work in the cold, in the heat, always honest, always kind. What happened last night was a wrongful arrest, nothing more, nothing less. And if you, a man of justice, do not act, then who will? If this can happen to your daughter, it can happen to any one of us. We cannot fight them alone, but you have the power to fight for us all." Robert's gaze swept across the faces gathered around him, men and women who had seen injustice, but had long carried their silence out of fear. Their words struck him with the weight of both grief and responsibility. He felt grief as a father, knowing his daughter had been humiliated, dragged through the streets in chains of prejudice. Yet alongside the grief burned pride in Marcia's strength, pride that she had not bowed, not lowered her voice, not surrendered her dignity even in the face of hatred. He listened intently, storing each word, each detail, every testimony became a stone in the foundation of the case he knew he would build. Every witness became a thread in the tapestry of truth that no courtroom could ignore. When the voices quieted, Robert straightened his shoulders. His tone was calm, but beneath it lay the iron edge of determination. "Your courage will not be wasted," he told them. "You have spoken the truth, and I will carry it forward. They thought they could silence my daughter, bury her dignity under lies and power. But with your voices, with your truth, we will remind them that justice is not blind, it only waits for those willing to demand it." The market fell silent once more, but it was no longer the silence of fear. It was the silence of anticipation, of a community that knew a storm was coming, and Robert Carter, with the fire of a father and the strength of an advocate, was ready to unleash it. The case against corruption. The courthouse stood like a fortress in the heart of the city, its marble pillars glinting beneath the morning sun. For decades, its halls had heard the voices of prosecutors, defenders, and judges. But today was different. Today, it was not just another case, it was a reckoning dot by the time the doors opened. The Carters were already overflowing. Word had spread like wildfire. Robert Carter, one of the nation's most respected advocates, was filing a case against not only a police officer, but an entire department. The charges were grave wrongful arrest, abuse of power, racial discrimination. Reporters crowded the steps, their cameras flashing, microphones stretching forward. Citizens from all walks of life filled the benches inside, their faces tight with anticipation. Some had come because they knew Marcia. Others had come because they had faced similar injustice and longed to see someone powerful take a stand. At the front of the courtroom, the officer sat stiffly in his pressed uniform. His usual arrogance had begun to falter, cracking under the weight of the attention pressing down on him. He glanced nervously toward his department's lawyers, but their stiff posture betrayed no comfort. When Robert Carter entered, the room shifted. Tall, broad-shouldered, his suit dark but immaculate, he walked with the presence of a man who carried not only the law but the truth on his side. He placed his files neatly on the table, adjusted his glasses, and looked once at the jury before rising to his full height. The judge gave a nod. Robert began. His voice was deep, commanding, and resonant enough to silence the restless shuffling in the gallery. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his tone deliberate, "this case is not just about my daughter. If it were, I might have fought it in silence, but it is greater than that. This is about every hardworking American who deserves dignity. It is about every citizen who should never live in fear of the very people sworn to protect them. The badge," he turned sharply, his eyes locking on the defendant, "is not a license to degrade, to humiliate, or to brutalize. It is a sacred responsibility." A ripple moved through the crowd. Some nodded, others wiped their eyes. The prosecution began calling witnesses. One by one, the shopkeepers took the stand. The baker described how Marcia had been respectful and calm, her only crime standing her ground against hate. The elderly shopkeeper, voice trembling but firm, repeated his words from the marketplace. "It was wrongful arrest, sir. Nothing more, nothing less." Each testimony added weight, each voice layering stone upon stone in the wall of truth Robert was building. And then came the moment everyone was waiting for. Marcia herself took the stand. The courtroom hushed to absolute silence. As she walked forward, her wrists still bore faint marks from the handcuffs, but her posture was straight, her head high. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore her oath, and sat down. Her voice was calm, steady, and carried the quiet strength of someone who had endured humiliation but refused to be broken. "I am not ashamed," she said, her eyes never leaving the officer who had arrested her. "Yes, I was humiliated. I was mocked. I was dragged away in front of the people who know me. But I am not ashamed, because I know my worth. I work hard. I serve my community. I treat people with respect. And no officer, no badge, no words of hate can take that dignity away from me." Her words hung in the air like a bell, clear and unshakable. For a moment, the entire room seemed frozen. Even the judge leaned slightly forward, listening. When she stepped down, Robert placed his hand briefly on her shoulder, a silent gesture of both love and pride. At last, the time came for closing arguments. Robert stood again, this time with the full fire of a father and the unwavering steel of an advocate. "This officer," he said, his voice rising, "believed he was above the law. He believed that the shield on his chest gave him the power to humiliate, to abuse, to treat an innocent woman as less than human. But let me remind you of something that every American should never forget. No one is above the law. Not me, not you, not him." He paused, his eyes scanning the jury, his hand pressing firmly on the table as though anchoring his words into the very wood. "Tonight, we remind him and all who think like him that the law is not a weapon for corruption. It is a shield for the innocent. Justice will stand tall, even when the night is darkest. And today, justice demands accountability." The courtroom erupted not in sound, but in a silence so heavy, so thick, it pressed against every chest in the room. It was the silence of truth that could not be denied. Justice delivered. The jury returned after only a few hours of deliberation. Their faces were grave, their expressions unwavering, when the foreman stood. Every sound in the courtroom seemed to vanish. The creak of benches, the scribble of pens, even the faint hum of the ceiling fans. The moment was sacred, suspended in silence. The judge's voice broke the stillness. As the jury reached a verdict, "We have, Your Honor." The foreman's words carried the weight of history. "We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of wrongful arrest, guilty of abuse of authority, guilty of misconduct unbecoming of his uniform." The officer's shoulders slumped. The arrogance he had carried like armor shattered in an instant. The courtroom, once tight with tension, now exhaled as though a storm had passed. The judge's gavel struck like thunder. "This court strips you of your badge and your position. You will serve your sentence under the very law you once twisted. Let this be a warning. Those who betray the public trust will not escape accountability." For the first time, the officer's eyes dropped not in defiance, but in shame. Outside, the courthouse steps exploded with sound. Reporters rushed to broadcast the outcome. Citizens wept, clapped, and lifted signs of support. Some embraced strangers, sharing relief and joy as though justice belonged to them all. For many, it did. Marcia stepped into the sunlight, her eyes glistening with tears. Her breath caught when she saw the crowd cheering not just for her, but for what her case represented. She turned and threw her arms around her father. Robert held her close, steadying her as she trembled from the release of weeks of fear and humiliation. He spoke softly, but his words carried the gravity of a lifetime of fighting for justice. "This is not only your victory, Marcia," he said, his hand firm on her shoulder. "This is a victory for every person who has ever been silenced, for every worker who rises before dawn to keep this country alive, for every mother and father who prays their child will be treated with dignity, for every soul in America who still believes that truth and justice are stronger than corruption." Marcia nodded, her tears falling freely now not from pain, but from relief, from vindication, from pride. The evening sun cast golden light across the courthouse steps, painting the crowd in warmth. The city, so often weary with division and doubt, seemed to breathe again. Horns honked in celebration, voices rose in chants, and church bells rang out in solidarity. As Robert and Marcia stood at the top of the steps, the moment became larger than them. They were no longer just father and daughter. They were symbols of resistance, of resilience, of justice delivered at last. That night, as the city settled under a sky streaked with stars, people across America spoke of the trial. Families at dinner tables, workers in break rooms, retirees watching the evening news each found reassurance that, though the road was hard, the system could still deliver fairness when courage demanded it. Justice was not an ideal locked in. Books are carved into marble. It was alive. It was standing tall. And on that day, it belonged once again to the people.